along the longitudinal fissure down the center of the brain.
How deep do I go?
All the way through.
All the way through?
All the way through. You're gonna fillet it so that you get two pieces, a right piece and a left piece.
I feel like that's a bad idea because
I did that with the avocado.
Right. Oh. But how smart am I for recognizing that this was a poor specimen?
It is. You are brilliant.
I'm up there. Oh. Ew, this is like, it's kind of hard to, I broke through I could feel breaking through something. I could feel that. Ugh.
Fabulous.
Ugh.
Oh, look at, that's so pretty. You did such a good job, Dr. Clute. You did as good at this as I did kayaking. Oh my God, it's so perfect. Hold on, let me put on gloves. So now we have a visual of the middle of the brain. So remember, we had that longitudinal fissure up top, which was a space. But what did you notice as you were cutting? Did that space go all the way through?
It did not go all the way through. I could feel different textures and different consistencies as I was cutting that really were horrible.
Okay, so one of the first things you said was that it was kind of hard, right? Mm-hmm. So it was hard in the middle because even though it's separated up on the surface of the brain, down deep in the center of the brain, here, everything was connected. Now, this section, it forms kind of like a tube shape. You have one now on the right side and one on the left side. But this was all one piece in the center of the brain. That one piece, this is called the corpus callosum. And what it does is it provides a bridge between the right and left sides of the brain so that the two sides can communicate with another, so that there's always information being shared about what's going on each side. But inside the corpus callosum, there's a space. But you notice that that space has a little membrane over top of it. That membrane is called the septum pellucidum, and it just separates the space of the right side from the space on the left side. That space inside, so if I move the septum pellucidum away a little bit, let's go over here. This one's already open. See how it's open space over here? The septum pellucidum here is gone. Mm-hmm. So this space is called the lateral ventricle. So you have a lateral ventricle in the left side of the brain and a lateral ventricle in the right side of the brain. The two lateral ventricles are separated from one another by that membrane, the septum pellucidum, that's come off here. It's on over here.
I see.
Okay, now I'm pointing out these ventricles because remember that fluid you asked me about around the brain? Mm-hmm. The fluid is also inside the center of the brain. And we find the fluid in these lateral ventricles. Inside the lateral ventricle, I don't know if we'll be able to see it. Don't get grossed out, okay? Okay, see this? These are actually just little capillaries. They look like smush, but I promise those are capillaries. It's called the choroid plexus. That's the structure that's producing the cerebrospinal fluid.
How do we remember all of these things?
Lots of flashcards, lots of diagrams. But if you can imagine the structure of the brain, you always want to think of structure dictates function. So if we know that the lateral ventricle is a space in the brain, why would we have a space there? Well, we have a space to put something in it, and that something is cerebrospinal fluid. But where does it come from? How does it get there? It comes from the capillaries that are embedded within it.
Is this bloody?
Like while you're living?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, but no. All the blood is contained within the blood vessels. So anything dark on here that you're seeing, those are the blood vessels. The blood itself does not go through, you could see it here, the blood itself does not go through the brain. And that's because around the brain, we have a structure called the blood-brain barrier. Mm-hmm. It's on a cellular level. So you're not going to see it when you do a dissection like this. It is something that you have to look under a microscope to see. It's a connection between the cells of the brain and the cells of the blood vessel. they form a barrier so that there's not open movements of materials, because we don't want everything passing through into the brain, right? That's why certain medications are specific for neurological treatments, because those are the only ones that could pass through the blood-brain barrier.
Fascinating.
Okay, so now if we go underneath the corpus callosum, there's another space here. This space is called the third ventricle. So that means that fluid from the lateral ventricle goes down through a little hole at the bottom and into this third ventricle.
What's the purpose of the fluid?
It's cerebrospinal fluid. It's that same fluid. It's controlling ion concentration. It's providing nutrients to the brain cells, because you do have that blood-brain barrier.
And so they're getting those nutrients from that blood-brain barrier?
They're getting the nutrients from the cerebrospinal fluid, because some of the nutrients
where does the cerebrospinal fluid get the nutrients?
Because the choroid plexus inside here, that's capillaries.
Right,
so all the
got
blood,
it.
Yep, that's a good question. All the blood inside the capillaries of this choroid plexus is being filtered out through special cells that make up that choroid, and now what you have remaining is just the fluid in this space. So the fluid will circulate through all the spaces. So the lateral ventricle is just one space. It goes down into the bottom here, into the third ventricle, which is this space. And then from the third ventricle, there's a space back here called the cerebral aqueduct. It's like a water slide almost. And it's going to bring the fluid down here to the base of the cerebellum. That's your fourth ventricle. And then can you see, maybe I should cut just a smidgen more. Okay.
Ugh, the smell.
Okay. So can you see how there's kind of like an opening in the center of the spinal cord?
Yeah.
That's called the central canal. So the fluid's going to leave that fourth ventricle and now go down into the central canal of the spinal cord as well. So the same fluid that circulates within and around your brain is the same fluid that circulates within the spinal cord.
I have a question.
Sure.
So if you're getting a spinal tap and getting like an epidural, why do they go into that fluid instead of like going into a vein?
So the spinal tap, they're going into that fluid. The epidural, they're not going into the fluid. They're just going into the connective tissue around the spinal cord, because that's where a lot of blood vessels are, close to the nerves, but still a safe enough area that if they go in with an anesthetic, it's going to go to those nerves that are nearby the epidural space. So that's in the lower back. A spinal tap, they usually do it around the same area just because of the spacing between the nerves. It's safer. But with the spinal tap, they are going in to extract some of that cerebrospinal fluid from the space. The reason they would do that is because if there's any infection in the central nervous system, it will appear in that fluid. So the fluid should normally be very clear. If it's infected, it will be very cloudy. It will be a cloudy fluid that indicates that there's some type of pathogen that has infected the central nervous system.
Okay. Just thought of that.
Good question. Okay, the last few structures that we're going to see when the brain is cut in half this way is back in the midbrain. You see this area that looks like a shadow of a circle? This is a part of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus filters all of your incoming sensory information. So it's like the traffic director. So if visual impulses come in, it's going to take those and send them to the occipital lobe. If auditory senses come in, it's going to take them and send them to the temporal lobes. It's going to direct all, because at any point in time, you have lots of different sensory stimuli coming into the brain all at once. So we want to make sure that it gets to its appropriate area.
Do those get damaged and cause problems?
The thalamus?
Yeah.
Not particularly. Only if there is a lack of oxygen to the brain or something like that, and that tissue is affected. Okay, last part here that I want you to see is back here in the cerebellum. You may think right away as soon as you see this that it looks like a tree. Dr. Clutie, you love trees.
I do love trees, and I can see, you know, the semblance there.
Yep. So they actually named this in Latin for the tree of life. It's called the arbor vitae. And it's all the white matter that extends throughout the entire cerebellum. And the cerebellum is important for our body to coordinate a lot of our voluntary movements. And that brings us to the end of the brain dissection.
Okay, this is what I think I learned today. That you know a lot about this, and I'm really impressed with everything you know. You sounded like so smart, and you answered all my questions that maybe were bad questions, but you know stuff.
I think they were great questions.
And I think the main point that I came away with today is that you know these things. I don't need to know these things. And if I need to know these things, I'll come ask you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. This was fun.
Okay. We'll say that.